All right, well, I think we'll get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Aaron Kramer, the president and CEO of BSR. We're a global business network and consultancy focused on all aspects of sustainability, environmental, social governance, etc. I'm delighted to be with you today for the 22nd episode. Hard to believe. Pardon me, getting over a cold of the monthly conversation series that BSR and Morrison Foerster have been very proud to present over the last couple of years or so. We are honored to have another very timely guest with us today, Davida Herzl, who is the co-founder and CEO of Aclima. Let me introduce Davida in a moment. First, my partner in crime, figuratively, of course, Suze McCormick. Suze is the co-chair of Morrison Foerster's ESG and Sustainability and Social Enterprise and Impact Investing Practices. Suze is a leading advisor on sustainable business and climate innovation. She is the co-host with me of this MoFo BSR series, and Suze brings very deep expertise at the intersection of law, business, and environmental impact. Suze is recognized also for her work helping companies and investors develop strategies that prioritize both climate responsibility and equitable growth. And I would say Suze is one of the OGs in terms of a big law firm partner working with deep expertise on these subjects. Suze will interview and be in dialogue with our guest today, Davida Herzl. Davida, as I mentioned, is co-founder and CEO of Aclima. Aclima is a public benefit corporation that measures, air pollution and greenhouse gases at scale and with precise resolution, serving governments and companies in technology, energy, and finance. In her role, Davida leads a diverse team that is pioneering a new way to diagnose the health of the air and track climate changing pollution. And I think the intersection of health and climate is so important for so many reasons, and something that I think deserves a lot more attention. So we're happy to give the subject that attention today. Davida was named one of Entrepreneur Magazine's 100 Women of Influence and of Scientific Americans for innovators who are making healthcare more fair. And she's also been named one of Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business, amongst other honors. And in addition to the honors for Davida personally, Aclima has been recognized as a Time Magazine Best Invention and by Fast Company, there's Fast Company again, at one of the top 100 companies in GovTech and more. Davida holds a JD from the University of San Diego School of Law and a BA in Economics, Political Science, and Communications from the University of California, San Diego. I spent a lot of time on that campus when I was a lawyer representing UC right before I came to BSR. So we'll talk about that sometime, Davida. Today's discussion is all about climate innovation for a just and sustainable future, leveraging the wealth of knowledge and expertise that Davida brings. And with that, I will now pass the microphone to Suze and Davida. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And it's a pleasure to get to continue these conversations in these more difficult times with BSR really being the best in class in terms of advising on ESG and responsible business issues. But I am thrilled, I have to say, I'm thrilled that to be here this morning with Davida. She was our top choice. I'm so glad she said yes, because I've had the opportunity to get to know her and over the years and to watch her as she has built Aclima to what it is today, which has been something really phenomenal. But Davida, I'd love to start so our audience can get to know you. I went to law school, never thought I was going to end up at a big firm, and here I am, 30 years later. You went to law school, and you decided to take a different path.
I
So,
did.
yeah, why don't we talk a little bit and you share a little bit about sort of your background, but as it relates to kind of the founding of Aclima?
Yeah, it has everything to do with the founding. When I was in law school, I went to law school knowing that I wasn't going to practice law, which I think put me in a strange category. But it was definitely, I think, a wonderful experience because I didn't feel the pressure of like getting a job at a firm. I knew that I was going to be an entrepreneur. And so it was a different experience for me. I knew, yeah, from the beginning that I was going to start a business.
Great. We'll talk about the focus of the business, specifically on hyper-local
Yeah.
air quality mapping.
Yeah. So I think, a lot of people that I talk to in the climate space don't really know or understand that the law actually is what shapes the rules of our society. And law shaped kind of how climate was thought about, how it was acted upon. And when I started in law school, one of the things that was really kind of eye-opening was my research into the origins of law that governed climate emissions. And not just climate, but environmentally harmful emissions, like all of the things that end up in the air, all of those things are regulated. And those regulations, they passed, I think they passed in like the 1970. And a lot of the technology that was used to tie regulation to standards, those standards were built on technology that was, from the 1970s and hasn't really improved that much, Suze, which is kind of shocking when we understand the scale of the problem, the scale of the challenge that we're facing, and we start to really understand that the underlying rules that govern all of this don't really protect us. And so I think that realization is what really drove me to start Aclima.
That makes sense. And it's really, it was really that understanding that it is critical to shift the conversation from just, you know, climate,
Right,
emissions benchmarking, scopes
right.
1, 2, and 3, to really
Right.
looking at the impact of climate change on communities and particularly public health.
Yes, that is the most important angle on all of this because at the end of the day, Suze, everything that goes into the atmosphere ends up in our lungs. Everything. And
Yeah.
so there isn't we forget, right? We're human beings that live on a planet that has like a very thin layer of breathable air. And that layer of breathable air affects everything. We don't realize it. For whatever reason, we're just disconnected from the impacts. But whether it's air or water, we don't acknowledge that these things end up in our bodies and that's why the EPA created, and that's why the EPA was created. That's why the Clean Air Act was created, was to protect public health. That's order of the day number one, because all of these things affect us deeply.
That was, it was sort of it's an interesting side note for the audience. And nothing environmental is an exempt purpose, because the IRS code section with exempt purposes was drafted before Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, because
Right,
we, sort of charged ahead as humanity, not understanding our impact on nature. And then
right,
the corollary, which is not only our impact on nature, but then when we have an impact on nature, how that impacts us in our communities. Can
right.
you provide a little more detail? Because I know you have done a deep dive on the sort of the unseen impacts,
Yeah,
particularly of pollution hotspots on communities,
right.
focused on schools and workplaces and otherwise.
Yeah. So, we've been, so I, when I came to Silicon Valley, there really wasn't a lot of ecosystem for supporting these kinds of companies. And especially companies for us, it's been a long journey. We knew that we had to prove our science, we had to prove our technology. Like there was a lot that we had to do in order to become accepted in the industry and all of that. So I think, that part of the journey was very difficult, was very intense, and required a tremendous amount of effort. I think for us, really where things sort of changed was when we started deploying in the context of government, in the context of government contracts and
Mhm.
utilities as well, where we're taking these measurements and the way we do them, the way we generate the measurements, we generate hyperlocal data, and so that what that means is that traditionally the measurements that are taken by government are very sparse. In the city of San Francisco, there's one monitor, Suze, one monitor. And the fact is that pollution varies block to block by up to, by significant amounts. And in order to really understand what we're experiencing, we have to measure at that resolution. And so the only way to do that was to do that with with cars, because cars were the only thing that were the only system that could traverse that much space and, and over time, and actually connect the dots on what are people being exposed to, what are people breathing. And so, just to give you a sense of that, we did our first major study to prove what we, and where you grow up kind of changes your understanding of all this. Um, but uh, but in order to prove that pollution varies by block to block by up to 5 to 8x, we had to publish a major paper on this that had to go through independent peer review, had to go through, that whole process. And at the end of the day, we wrote that paper with Google, we wrote that paper with EDF. There were a number of scientists involved. And we were able to put that paper out there that proved that pollution is actually hyperlocal, that it varies from block to block by up to 8 to 10x. And so that means that where you live really matters, right? Because where you live ends up exposing you to those pollutants. And so that was, I think, the first major breakthrough in our science that really put us on the map, because it was peer reviewed. And we've had a lot of papers since then, but I think that paper was very significant because it had so much behind it in terms of the science and in terms of the people that were involved. It was, Google and Josh Apte was funded by EDF, and we had a lot of scientists involved. But that paper was really foundational to what we do.
And I mean, this is one of the reasons why, I was such a fangirl for so long, because, your typical entrepreneur sees an issue that is clearly identified and ring fenced and like, okay, I'm going to develop a solution to that.
Right.
For you, you knew there was an issue, but in order to make sure that there was a market and that your company was going to be successful, it's almost you had to prove it. It's like you
Yeah.
had to go out and not, you're a public benefit, so you have the
Right.
dual fiduciary duties,
Right.
but work with the top scientists so it would have credibility, so you can say, no, this is
Correct.
actually a huge issue that is going to be ignored
Mhm.
before you could actually make the business case for what Aclima is going to be offering. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right. We had to prove the science first, and we
Yeah.
had to get the partners to help us do that, right? We had to get Google, like these are not easy partners. But we did. And it took us a long time, but we built the technology, we did all the science, but that was foundational, Suze.
And just take me one step further, because we've talked about how it differs block by block, but
Mhm.
also just in the wake, we're a couple months, but it was yesterday that we saw what happened in Southern California.
Correct.
Talk a little bit about also what the science and what you've looked at in terms of the long-term,
Yeah.
public health risks and issues associated with particularly wildfire, but all
Yeah.
kinds of air pollution.
Yeah. So I think, it goes back to that really simple mantra that we are what we breathe, right?
Mhm.
We are what we eat, we are what we breathe. But I think, when it comes to wildfires, um, and especially the fire in LA, I think what made that fire so significant was number one, I think the size in an urban center was just so epic, was so massive. And I think also the things that burned. The things that burned it wasn't trees, it wasn't like a fire that didn't touch modern life. It certainly did. And I think for us, when we look at that, we look at everything that burned and we say, holy moly, there are a tremendous amount of toxins. This is not like typical, like, I don't know, anything that, when we think wildfires, we tend to think of wood and we tend to think of, the kinds of things that you see in sort of in those settings. In this case, it was our modern homes. It was homes full of petrochemicals. It was homes full of toxins that are not measured by the EPA in their standard measurement set. And so, because of that, people thought the air was healthy literally days afterwards, but it wasn't. And we've partnered with Cedar Sinai on a bunch of work on that front because I'm convinced that public health is the angle that we have to deliver that message in a big way.
And we have to put it in forefront so people
Yeah,
think, they don't think about just, carbon footprinting. They
right,
don't just think about the protocol and their
right.
scopes 1, 2, and 3. They're really looking at health. And let's pivot. We sort of went to Southern California. I know initially you were focused on Oakland, but take that as a case study and help explain how getting
Mm,
this hyper local
yeah,
air quality data really can transform our understanding of the impact of a
mm,
community.
right. So, um, West Oakland, and there's a champion in West Oakland, Miss Margaret Gordon, who really has been a tremendous influence on me, on the movement, on California, just an incredible human being who who started advocating after she retired. And so she really had, and she did it because, she worried about her grandchildren. She was worried about her family. And in West Oakland, so West Oakland is one of these communities that has been sort of it's an environmental justice community. It's a community that has been historically sort of underinvested in tremendously. And they used our data. So our data was part of an initiative in West Oakland to understand what was happening block by block across the community in terms of the pollutants, in terms of the different criteria pollutants, toxic pollutants. And one of the things that we measured was diesel particulate matter. And we decided to focus on diesel particulate matter because it is such a powerful cancer-causing pollutant. I think during the time that we, took measurements, so we published the measurements in 2017. But up until now, they've been tracking reductions in the pollutant reductions in disease. There were 54% reductions in cancer across West Oakland and reduced childhood asthma during that period. But it was a very significant shift that we saw as a result of data-driven action. And what that means is that they took the data, they built a plan around the data to actually reduce emissions across the community. And they saw those emissions reductions come in, very significant changes that have an actual impact on lives. These are lives that we're talking about, right? This is not like some abstract number. These are human beings who, at the end of the day, get to live. And so that, for me, is like the number one thing that we need to be focused on is saving lives and improving public health so that communities can thrive because they were able to take all of that data and then they were able to apply for a federal grant. They got a $500 million in funding to decarbonize the port because we found that the major pollutant was port pollutants from a lot of diesel and a lot of other emissions that, or sources of emissions that were actually having a huge impact. And to see that community go from the levels of pollution that we started measuring to then, a 30% reduction or 54% reduction in cancer is huge. Like that's
Mhm.
the kind of thing that we want to see across the state, across the country, right? Those kinds of changes.
No, I agree, and I'd love to. We need to see those changes, and let's just pivot a little bit and help the audience understand exactly what your solution is. How does Aclima help bridge this gap between these what can be invisible, at
Yeah,
least initially, but have real impact,
right.
risks, and solutions that
Yeah.
can be adopted?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so our solution, we measure all of the things that are measured by the EPA. We also measure greenhouse gases. We also measure heavy metals and toxics and other pollutants that are important for human health. Again, for me, climate change, we can talk about climate change. It's a global issue, but the fact of the matter is we all breathe in our homes and in our communities. And so it matters at the hyper local scale, which is why hyper local data is so important. Because if we don't have that hyper local data, we don't actually know. And so the way we do this is that we instrument vehicles with our sensors. Those sensors take measurements as they're driving every second. We use machine learning. We use a lot of sophisticated technology to stitch that data together to paint a picture of actual pollution. And so our system actually pulls all that together and spits it out, puts it into a graphic interface or a report, whatever it is. But we deliver that data to enable decision makers to understand what's happening at the local scale.
Great. So you really, my understanding, my simplistic understanding is you have these devices, you put them in mobile vehicles, you enter into agreements so that you
Yeah,
can take, you know, companies that have fleets of vehicles,
right.
those then naturally, you're not increasing emissions. Those
No,
vehicles are moving through these communities anyway, and as they move through, they are able to capture the data.
correct. And we
They,
started all of this, Suze, with Google Street View. So they were
yeah,
the first fleet that we worked with to figure this out. And what was really amazing about that partnership was just, the degree of risk that they took on me and on our idea was just extraordinary. And they put me through months and months and months of diligence, but ultimately, I think, we proved that we had a roadmap and that we were executing on it, and we did it. And we're now working with.
yes, as we talked about, you are continuing,
Yeah.
accelerating your work because it's needed now more than ever,
Yes.
even with current federal
Yes.
policy.
Actually, because of federal policy. And I really believe, and because I grew up in business, so I grew up, my father was an executive and and very involved in sustainability. But one of the things that I learned growing up is just, if people are given a choice, if they can make that choice between right and wrong, they will typically make the right choice. And I believe that business is a huge enabler of solutions in this space. And so I'm very excited about what we're doing. We're about to deploy across the state of California, and we're doing it at a very, very, very reduced cost for the state.
Well, I'll just, as an aside, it was my lunch with Aaron Kramer at BSR in 2001. I had started doing, I'd seen this issue, particularly around
Mm,
climate, and
mm,
I was, starting to do a lot of pro bono work for nonprofits. And I remember the words that came from Aaron's mouth. He looked at me and said, business itself can affect, good and
yes.
change too. And I was like, okay. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what you're embodying with Aclima. So
Yeah.
can we maybe share a little bit more about what you're doing in California? And then I want to
Yeah.
pivot because I know you're also looking at and utilizing AI as most people are
Hmm.
in a very smart way. But let's talk first about your build out a little bit in
Yeah.
and throughout California.
Yeah. So I'll get wonky for a second.
Okay. I
Um,
like wonky.
but I'll talk about a law in California called AB 617 that was actually really groundbreaking at the time. And our paper that we wrote at the time about hyperlocal pollution, where we prove that this happens, was part of the dialogue at the time. And billions of dollars have gone out the door to deal with emissions in 19 communities across the state of California. So since 2017, about 19 communities have been reached through this
Mhm.
program that is really designed to reduce emissions, to reduce exposure, and protect human health. Very, very ambitious program, extremely expensive program. One of the most expensive parts of it is the monitoring part because we need data to understand what people are being exposed to.
Mhm.
And so we've designed our technology and our business model in such a way that now, especially, right now, it's particularly relevant because the state is in a budget crisis. It
Mhm.
can't spend billions of dollars on monitoring. And so with us, they're spending 30 million, actually $27 million, and they're going to reach 64 communities. And right now, it's not even I don't know, it's a step change, right?
Mhm.
Because they're going from 19 over 9 years, something like that, to 64 in 1 year. That's a
Wow.
massive difference. And we're going to be measuring everything, all the EPA pollutants, all the toxics and heavy metals, but also greenhouse gas emissions at this hyperlocal resolution, and it'll be the same data everywhere. And so suddenly you're going to have comparable data. That's actually a huge breakthrough to be able to look at one community and understand, okay, what does methane look like? What does, what are the different pollutants and how do they compare community to community? And being able to do that across an entire state is kind of extraordinary.
It's really, I mean, that speaks to you at the very beginning, when you were sort of in your founding days, you were
Yeah.
partnering with business, with state, with nonprofits,
Hmm.
and that has continued
Yes.
as you have built out, including your sort of relationship with CARB and with the state of California. Tell me a little bit about what role the private sector can and should play. I
Yes.
know you've gotten private sector funding, but
Yes.
again, I can't help myself. You've stayed true to your goals because you're a
Yes.
public benefit corporation, but
Correct.
um, talk to me a little bit about the role that private sector should be playing during this build out.
Yeah. Great question. Because I think that the private sector plays a very important role in all of this. And often the private sector is vilified, and that's not accurate. That's just not what I see. That's not what I hear. People want to do the right thing, and especially when they understand all of this. I think one of the challenges for the private sector has been that they haven't had this kind of data before. And so once they have this kind of data and once they can see it, most companies take the right step. They want to correct, they want to be good neighbors, right? They don't, I mean, the people in their communities literally are their neighbors. So they don't
Mhm.
want to hurt their communities, right? They want to take action to improve the situation in their communities. So that's what we see over and over and over again, across the board, any kind of emitter, that's what we see.
It makes sense. And when we go back, and Aaron and I have talked about this a lot, when you go back to sort of what ESG was originally, there
Hmm.
was an understanding that business, to be successful financially, needed to have a positive relationship with its employees, needed to have
Right,
a positive relationship with the communities in which it operated.
right.
That's sort of part and parcel. I feel like in some ways, this space is being attacked for some of the wrong reasons when
Yes.
your most conservative businesses believe in these tenets. And again, what you're proposing is an extension of that. It's how business can, if you invest and then have a healthier workforce, that is going to correlate in not just doing the right thing, but also
Right.
into profitability.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. When you have a positive impact on your community, right? On the people that work for you, on the people that buy from you, you see a very positive cycle of response. And so that is definitely what we see across the board.
So just before we get back to the technology, because I have not forgotten that we're going to
Mhm.
touch on AI. What advice would you give? I'm running a small business in San Jose. I can now get this data. I can get more involved. What advice do you have, for companies that actually want to continue to embrace sustainability goals in this
Right.
climate?
Right. I think that is such a good question because you're right, it's in this climate, but yet what's right is always right. So I just think that, I kind of, in order to do what I need to do in my work and with my team and with my, clients, I need to stay focused on the why. And the why is to improve human conditions across the board, right? And so I think in terms of advice for anybody coming into the space or in the space or that has to interact with our data, keep an open mind. And just and the fact of the matter is, a lot of people are afraid of community pushback, but actually communities and the public are very often the source of your solutions. If you involve them in solution finding, it's amazing what can be done. And I think oftentimes that fear has kept action at bay. And I think that there is a big opportunity right now to actually embrace that partnership with the communities that you serve to actually do something meaningful.
Yeah, because it's the right thing, and because
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to help your companies thrive longer
Right.
term.
Right.
Let's go back because I got kind of excited about what you're doing in California. And let's go back to the technology. So you started with the sensors. Again, you deployed with Google Streets. You have obviously expanded well beyond that with your partnerships. Talk a little bit about how you're now also using AI to really machine learning to really enhance the mapping and the insights that you can provide.
Yeah, so it's so relevant and obviously on top of everybody's mind, but we're actually using it to accelerate our time to deployment, our time to, insights. We developed 64 plans for 64 communities. We did it with a human in the loop, but we had AI assist us in building out those plans. And having that combination of technology and human insight really enables so much and enables us to do a ton that we wouldn't have been able to do before. I mean, 64 community plans, that's not something that, you can just sort of, yeah, I think before. And that this was the reality 2 years ago, right? A year
Mhm.
ago, this was so difficult. And so I think the opportunity to take our work and scale it is really a significant breakthrough in our work. And what's really amazing about our work is that there's always like AI doesn't replace our people, right? AI supplements our people. And so we have experts, but with AI, they can reach more people. And so I think that the capacity to do that is a massive accelerant. And it's a real world, it's like, not abstract. This is a real world application of AI.
Yeah, and I think we're at the beginning. I went for a walk with somebody yesterday who said, "Yeah, we're advancing on AI, and how we can harness it for good, particularly around climate and underserved communities. We're really just at the beginning."
Right.
But what I really like, again, Aclima is one of the companies that's focused there, and I think
Yeah.
can be a beacon for others. Okay, this is how you use it. Let me just take the other side of that coin for a second in terms
Mhm.
of AI being a tool for good, but also, how we ensure it remains a tool for good,
Hmm.
particularly around environmental justice. I
Yes.
know I know because as a firm, we're focused on AI and doing a lot of counseling, but there can be significant issues. Give me some thoughts on that.
Hmm. I think I think there's a lot of potential issues for sure. And we've been looking at a model that was advanced by let's see, what's the name of this organization? I'm trying to remember. It was advanced by a major scientific organization on the West Coast in Seattle that is advancing an open, legible model of AI, right? So instead of having AI be totally closed and be totally proprietary, we're saying we should embrace a model that actually makes this open, makes it really transparent. Because if we're going to be making governance decisions about the distribution of public resources, that those dollars, we need to be able to go back and understand how those decisions were made. And so I think that there's a very strong impetus for entrepreneurs, especially, to embrace these new technologies and new business models alongside those technologies. Right now, if you look at the predominant themes around AI or the predominant conversations, it's all about closed, right? It's all about kind of let us do the magic back here and we'll show you one day, maybe. But I think that it's actually really, really important to be open about some of these things because, and you can still, we still maintain the proprietary nature of our data, et cetera. But I think that having AI work alongside us in an open way can actually improve governance and can actually improve access.
Yeah, I think it can. And I think part of it is a lot of the work that is being done on sort of responsible tech. And that's just a plug. That will be our next session.
Hmm.
But to make sure that people as they're developing are thinking about stakeholders. But that I mean, that's embedded in your business proposition. So you're
Right.
sort of the example of the company that
Right.
The two are wedded, so there's not an offset. You don't do
Right.
good sort of your little pro bono or 1% on
No.
the side. It's embedded into what you do as a
Right.
company.
Every single dollar that we make should be a symbol of our impact.
Well, I want to invite, we've got a good audience. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will follow up because I will try to get to them, but I want to get wonky again with you for just a second. Um, Explain what cap and trade reauthorization means, number one, and then number two, how we factor in healthcare costs
Yeah.
to these kinds of policy tools. But I think
Yeah.
for this audience, they may already know, but it'd be great to sort of set the stage first.
Yeah. So Reauth is happening this year, which is a really big deal because it's billions of dollars. I mean, it's just an extraordinary amount of money, Suze. And I think that's why it's getting so much attention. One, yeah, it's a major driver of cost in the state. And I think, state lawmakers are grappling with what that means and grappling with how to set up the policy so that we don't accidentally change certain long-term costs that can be really, really impactful, like healthcare. So, for example, with regards to cap and trade, reauth, and healthcare costs, the two right now are decoupled. There are some, policy wonks and people having conversations about connecting the dots between the costs of healthcare and emissions, because the people that bear those costs are the people that are in environmental justice communities. They are literally sort of people talk a lot about sacrifice zones. These people live in sacrifice zones. And as a result, you have an incredible amount of healthcare costs being borne by those people, but actually borne by all of us, right? Because it's a shared costs. And we don't think of climate change in this way, where we actually couple healthcare costs with emissions, but we should. I mean, that is the natural thing to do. And so I think that the reauthorization, and my hope is that everything goes well. The reauthorization is going to have a huge impact on California's budget.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah. And factoring in those healthcare costs, because to some extent they are borne by all of us.
Yes,
But I will say they're disproportionately borne by the underserved communities that can least afford to pay. So they end up
correct.
with insufficient healthcare. I think early on, this is now 25 years ago, the world of impact was divided really into people and planet. And you had
Mm,
companies, you had funders, you had everybody, you were on one side or the other. And
mm,
it wasn't that there was a war, it was just like,
yeah,
we've got to be focusing, we got to focus on our knitting. We've got to focus on what we know. I was
right.
on the planet side because I'm like, if we don't have a world left,
Mm,
the rest of it's not going to matter. And this sounds really trite, but Katrina, what changed was Katrina, and
right,
it was like, oh, like these you cannot separate
right.
the two, because the underserved communities are the ones that are, as your evidence and your solution is
Hmm.
dedicated, those underserved communities, which are predominantly Black and Brown,
Hmm.
are the ones who are going to be most impacted.
Right.
And you can't separate racism from climate, that the two
No.
are so intertwined.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents. So how do we, in addition to taking, to making sure healthcare and climate are considered as part of the reauthorization, are there other steps we can take to ensure that climate and air quality solutions prioritize under, historically
Hmm.
frontline or historically underserved communities?
I think they have to. I think if it's going to be a solution, it has to.
Yeah.
You cannot leave, such a significant portion of our population behind. And by behind, I mean sacrificed, because that is really what it comes down to. And, we have, and in the climate world, right, there are a lot of different models of impact and how to measure over time, blah, blah, blah. Great. I only care about one thing. Are we preventing disease? are we actually saving people from life-altering disease? Because
Mhm.
that's really what matters, right? And I'm sorry, but if I'm a business, I'm a whatever, I need to have a functioning population. And if I don't have a functioning population of every color, I don't have a market. And so I have, as a business person, I have an interest in seeing that population thrive and seeing that population be healthy. So that's my framing on climate.
That's exactly right. And the last time I saw you in person, we were together during Climate Week on a panel with those doctors who were on the front line treating
Yes.
everybody in LA. Again, it was just, yeah, I was not enough was included in the press about
Mm,
the long-term health
right.
impacts. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure whether people are just not drawing the parallels, but it is much longer lasting than just, rebuilding the houses
Yes.
that are down there.
Right. Yes.
So
And that is
go
the
ahead.
problem.
That is the problem.
Yeah, that is the problem.
So, you typically, you are Aclima is a technology company.
Yes,
Um, what
100%.
what are the lessons you've learned? And this is again for our audience who listens now and in the future, the
Hmm.
lessons learned for technology developers about how
Mm.
you can integrate really equity
Yeah.
into technology-driven solutions.
I would say integrating responsibility into technology solutions. And it takes a founder and founding teams that are very committed to that, Suze, because I think it's so easy because of the way that the tech sector works, because of the cycles, because of the amount of funding, all of those things. It's very easy to let go of that responsibility. And so I think that the harder path, which is to see that responsibility through, is actually the best path. It's the most rewarding because it's where you can where you can make a real difference. And it doesn't take that many people, right? It's a small number of people that start these companies. And so I just think if we can get more people talking about this, I think we can actually make a difference.
Yeah, I'll just put in a plug. We are our mutual friend who's starting a new incubator, which is for technology companies that want to ensure the positive impact for profitability and
Right?
otherwise.
Right.
But we can talk more about that later. I do have a question from the audience.
Mhm.
And we've focused on California, but really the question is whether Aclima's work is going to extend beyond California and what those plans look like.
Right. So we've already gone global because we worked with Street View. And so for a while, for several years before the pandemic, we were mapping in so it was like actually the year of the pandemic. We got onto Street View cars and we were on Street View cars around 60 to 70 cities around the world. And
Hmm.
what we were doing was demonstrating this new potential, this new capability. And then we came back to the United States and we've now been going to market. And so we've been going to market with, we did a big push in New York, where we mapped across 10 different regions of the state, very similar to California, but California's is just on another scale. But yeah, we want to continue to do this work.
That's great. So any other questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat and I will check. But in addition to your technology, what do you think is going to drive the greatest change? What are the most exciting innovations that you are seeing really at the intersection of climate and health and technology?
Yeah. I think it's the people. I think it's the people that are impacted. Um, and that means it's all of us, right?
Yeah.
And so, um, and so I think, so we're seeing it now in California, for example, where every community that we're deploying in, we're having community meetings, we're having so much involvement from the public that I think that is really the future of action. It's publicly driven, publicly transparent, and it is and that kind of momentum, it creates a momentum on its own to have that kind of public engagement. And I think that that public engagement is literally everything, Suze, because that's where it's going to come from. That's where the change is going to come from, because it's not going to come from me writing some new rules. I mean, sure, there could be new rules, but I really think that the place where change starts is at the bottom. So I can build a great technology, right? I can build a fantastic technology, but the people that have to call on that technology are the public, are the people that are impacted.
And how do we, can I just drill down on that?
Mhm.
I'll give an example. So I was sent by a client to the Tenderloin to talk with a bunch of community leaders about how we could, we could embed some climate resilience
Mm,
within the community. We had a long discussion. I left the meeting. One of the leaders ran out after me and said, don't do any of the work, don't spend money. We can't do anything in this community until we address fentanyl. And she
mm,
described to me granularly how they have organized, and I'm still just overwhelmed. They had organized mothers who stand on every street corner so that the kids have, clear
mm.
passage because more
Wow.
children live in the Tenderloin than anywhere else in the Bay Area.
Wow.
Um, and I get my question is, how do I refer to it as reverse governance, particularly on climate. What a community needs is often not what a funder, being a foundation, or what really smart people in New York or San Francisco think. It is very specific to the community. It's almost like the hyper local.
Right.
How do we make sure we get that? I mean, what that get that information
The information from that
from the
community.
community about
Yeah.
what they need most?
Yeah. So that's part of what we're doing in California. So we are, on the one hand, delivering this technology, delivering this data, but on the other hand, working in close partnership with these communities. They By close partnership, I mean we help fund them. So we are a on the one hand, delivering this data, and on the other hand, pulling in their expertise to help us understand where the problems are, to help us understand how we should deploy in these communities to really be able to make a difference. And I think, that kind of partnership, and you're right, it's like next generation governance. I don't know what to call it, but
I refer to it as reverse governance. It is
yes,
instead of hop top down where you have your CEO and your board, you are getting down to the it is an extension of what
yes,
you're doing at Aclima at the
right,
hyper level to
right,
determine that in Modesto they don't need more solar. They may
right,
need more solar, but they most need a little device so that
right,
they can get clean drinking water.
right. Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
those kinds of things. And that information lives in the community, right? It's not something that I can go and send a sensor and get that information. I actually have to build my database in partnership with the community groups and with the communities. And so I think that really, and this is what I'm so frustrated with tech, because I really believe we have the capabilities to do this. We have the potential to deliver solutions in a way that are locally shaped but expert informed, right? And so
Mhm.
expert informed, locally shaped solutions, I think that's the future of climate action.
That's exactly right. And it's also, if I can just commend to you and the audience, the work of the community foundations and quite frankly, the CDFIs who,
Hmm.
you sort of end up with because they can often have kind of the deepest and the ability to access within the individual communities.
Right.
So one more question from the audience, and that's, do you have the study to prove the importance of hyperlocal measurements? Is there a link? Is that on your website? Um, Davida, or
Um,
how could somebody find that if they wanted?
yeah, so we can I can share it out with you, but it's on the website.
Okay.
And so yes, there's a section that has publications, and in that section you'll see all of the different studies that we've done on hyperlocal measurements.
Okay. So going to that Aclima, if you Google Davida's fabulous company, you're going to be able to find all of that information. So one final question before I turn it back to Aaron.
Hmm.
Um, what keeps you hopeful? I have moments where I am more or less hopeful. I was not hopeful about 2 months ago, and then I signed up to run Beta Breakers because I needed something
Mm.
that gave me great joy, and I did that in full pink tutu. But tell me, on the matter at hand when we're talking about health and climate
Yeah.
and frontline communities, what gives you the most hope?
I mean, I'll be honest, there are days when it's really hard. Um, but at the same time, I see it on my team, and I think it's my team. Like my team is the epitome of it. Just fully committed, fully in, figuring it out no matter what, just and no matter what obstacles we face, right? And I think that tenacity, that spirit, if you have enough people confronting this moment like that, I think you can change things. And so that is what gives me hope. But it's really my team. It's that what they epitomize.
Yeah, it's my team, and I know it's Erin's team. And again, it's the circle of people who are focused
Yes.
in our communities and elsewhere to
Yes.
work together.
Correct.
So thank you so much, Davida.
Thank you,
Why don't I turn
Suze.
it back over to Erin to close us out?
Great.
Wow. Thank you both. What a great discussion. I'm the kind of person where I rarely listen to a dialogue like this for an hour and don't have anything I disagreed with. I didn't have anything I disagreed with that I heard from the two of you in this great conversation. And Davida, climate gets so tied up, net zero this, science-based targets that. It's all important, but this is very real. This is impacting people's lives. And the statistics that you cited from West Oakland were very, very compelling. And while the reverse governance point is truly important, I would think that every city hall in America would want this because
Yes.
it will help improve the health and well-being of their citizens in very direct and demonstrable ways. So bravo, it just really interesting. And so one of the things that's keeping me optimistic is conversations like this. So
Hmm.
thank you very much for that. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a really great conversation, as I mentioned. Maybe the team can help me out. I think our next episode is June 23rd, if I'm not mistaken. I know it is the week of June 23rd. I think it may be the 23rd. Suze, I don't know if you have that in front of you or not, but stay tuned. We've got a great next episode lined up, and we now the bar has been raised, so we're going to try and make sure that the next conversation is equally compelling. And yes, confirmation, June 23rd. So stay tuned for more details. Davida, Suze, thanks very much, and to everyone, I hope you have a really good day with more wind at your back after this conversation. Bye now.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.